We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the mountains and the rivers on which we gather today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. We promise to walk softly and gently on this land, standing together in solidarity and in truth alongside our First Nation brothers and sisters.
I think this journey is not only important for the Healesville Uniting Church congregation, but it's important to everyone in Australia. We need to acknowledge that this land was never ceded by the First Nations people. Terrible atrocities have been committed against them, and that we need to make amends for these events.
So did we know all this? No, not really. That was until our former Minister, Jenny Gordon, went on a visit to Northern Australia as part of a Uniting Church group. And she came back and challenged us because people there had asked her about Corandurk. And she said something like ignorance wasn't okay and we should do something about it. And so our Walking Together group was formed.
Healesville Uniting Church and our surrounding area has a high population of Indigenous people in comparison to the state generally. As we know, there have been so many atrocities inflicted upon our First Nation peoples throughout Australia. And I think it's important that we understand the area in which we live, how we can connect and possibly help in the healing process.
I've been living in Healesville for over 44 years and come to understand that we're actually living on Wurundjeri country and that we're living amongst First people. So I think it's important to get an understanding of the community in which we live.
Having that connection to the land and knowing that the First Nations people have that connection and how they manage the land and how they have lost so much through colonisation, that loss of connection of their culture, and I just think it's really important to try and encourage or be involved in or have some connection with encouraging that to come back.
We started off with a simplistic view of what we could do. We contacted Una. Una is the community meeting place for the First Nations people of this area. We went there and we were warmly welcomed and shared in hospitality. Later on, when they were doing significant work on their buildings, this hall here in our church was used for groups and for community meals. A good start, but it sort of didn't really go anywhere else. And so we wondered, what was it that we could do? And we felt the thing that we could do was to educate ourselves. And we started off on that journey.
Well, I lived in Lilydale, 20 minutes down the road, and I grew up there and I never knew about our local Indigenous population.
Yeah, you said you didn't even know about Corandurk.
Did not, that's right.
I was, many years ago, I was in a country town and I went to a play in the local hall put on by the local players, and the play was about the massacres that had happened in that area. And I'd lived there for 15 years.
Yes.
I had no idea that had happened, and I was just devastated.
The experience for me has been really interesting. I've managed to read 5 books on the subject. Just briefly go through them. The first one is The Dark Emu, which is quite well known, written by Bruce Pascoe. Farmers or Hunter-Gatherers, written by 2 historians, Peter Sutton and Karen Walsh. They have a look at Aboriginal spirituality and the clash of cultures between white and First Nations culture and how their lifestyles were so completely different and they didn't understand each other. Why weren't we told? Which is really instructive for teachers, and it challenges our school system to have a serious look at white settlement, what Aboriginal life was like before white settlement, and the effects of white settlement. In fact, it doesn't hide the facts that there were a lot of massacres and cruelties imposed upon First Nations people. Following Jesus in Invaded Space, it has a look at how we as Christians should approach our First Nations neighbours. Mick Woywood, Barak versus the Black Hats of Melbourne. And that's particularly relevant to this area because it talks about the Corandurk mission station, which was set up in the 1860s in Healesville.
Bring that because there's a lot of feeling of, oh, it's in the past, let's just get over it. Why don't they just get over it? That sort of thing. So if we can sort of educate on how they can't just get over it, it's not that easy. There's a lot of generational trauma that's there that's going to take a long time.
I've continued to learn that this is a complex issue and that walking together is an ongoing daily journey for me. I need to be willing to respectfully listen and to learn more about what is important to our First Nations people, and in particular the Wurundjeri people.
Well, we decided that we couldn't speak on behalf of First Nations people, but we decided that what we could do was to inform ourselves, to educate ourselves, and to be a voice for the things that we found out. And we have done this by the making and provision of banners that we have put in the front of our church, which is quite central in Healesville. And we have led worship services, and we've spoken to people, and we continue to have those conversations.
My concern too was that perception of the church being part of the problem, of a church group trying to connect with First Nations people in terms of losing culture and indoctrinating into white ways, into colonised ways.
It's been humbling and it's been challenging and it's been a time of learning. I came up here with a lot of expectations, a lot of hope and a lot of excitement based on my experiences and encounters with First Nation people, and I came into an area and a community that was not what I quite expected. I think the fact that I came during a time of lockdown has been particularly difficult because my normal ways of engaging with people is exactly that. I go out, I meet people, I sit down with people, I talk to people, I like to build relationships. And you can't do that when everybody's in lockdown. In general, the response of the congregation in terms of acknowledgement of country and of creating liturgy that's more culturally appropriate, I think the positive is that some people are really welcoming of it and really engage with it. Some people also want to know more, they want to learn more, they want to understand more, and that's a wonderful thing too. Some people question why. Why do we do things this way? Why is it important? Again, that's another learning opportunity.
If people really could understand what has happened and how that generational trauma is still, and the genocide and that sort of stuff still happening with the incarceration rates and all those sorts of things, and the prejudice and the things that still happen today. I think when you bring people's attention to that sort of makes them think a little bit more. Because I think we've been whitewashed, and
the banners are part of that. The banners already make a statement to the community that says, this is what we believe, this is what we support, this is what we advocate. And that's a great thing. And I think it's been great because it's been so out there. Everyone sees it.
That truth-telling is such a big part of all of this. So if we can have some sort of part in that would be great. And I've learnt, I got in touch with the NAIDOC people to use the Voice Treaty Truth, so we could put that on the front of the church, and then in front we support the Uluru Statement, kind of said, can we use your logo? kind of thing, and they wanted us to send pictures and show how we were supporting them, because then I think that's getting closer. I feel like that the momentum's there and it's getting there.
We're further along the journey, but there is still a long way to go. Each small step is a sign of respect, connecting further with the wisdom and insights of our First Nations peoples on the path to reconciliation and togetherness.
We look for a future that is not our own.
We've learnt a lot about what walking together isn't. And walking together is not about going in and performing a program of some sort only to leave when the funding runs out. And it's not about a quick fix. It's about listening. And I think that's one thing we all do agree on, is that listening to the voice of our First Nation people is so important.